Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Nettie Owens with Sapari Solutions. I help high achiever business owners scale their business without burning out. Today, in What Businesses Need to Know Right Now, I've brought Jenny Coombs to share her expertise. She educates those in financial services industry about the importance and usage of sustainable and responsible investing and financial practices, and helps them bring that knowledge and the resources necessary to as many of their clients as possible. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi, Nettie. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. I guess I should have said you're with the College of Financial Planning.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, we have an interesting topic today, very educational, and I'm excited to inform those who are listening and to see what questions come up. So the first question, though, to really get us kicked off is, what is ESG? Because that's a phrase that's getting bantered around now, and our listeners might not quite understand what it is.
Absolutely. So some people might actually relate more to the original concept, which was socially responsible investing, or SRI. These days, it's referred more to as sustainable and responsible investing. But this is a strategy, a way that we can work investments into achieving a specific long-term goal, namely things that are protecting the environment and things that are protecting society. ESG, which has become much more of the coined term these days, stands for environmental, social, and governance factors. So these are the criteria actually that we use to evaluate whether or not an investment strategy is sustainable. The two tend to get thrown around interchangeably, in the industry a little bit, but it's helpful first to just make that distinction. And it's become quite important these days for a lot of reasons, namely because many businesses are starting to consider more socially conscientious and business practices, also sustainable business practices as well. So this is why it's important to know that term.
Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that, because to be honest, I didn't know what it meant. I'd heard of socially responsible investing, and I'm glad to have the definition here. So it really talks about the business practices, and that's something that you can look for in your investments as well as applying them to your own business, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. Yep.
So let me go back over here. Sorry, I lost my place there for a second, but everything is good. So what's made it popular, or maybe why the change in the last several years? What's initiated that change?
So it's kind of snowballed actually into kind of a larger avalanche that just keeps on going. It hasn't just all of a sudden become popular, which is kind of funny. It actually started being measured as a viable investment strategy, namely with the sustainable influence, since about the mid-90s. But it's really taken off from 2010 onward. And part of the reason that avalanche, if you will, started rolling was due to the market collapse in 2008, 2009. There was a lot of distrust in the industry. This was one way to ensure that businesses understood that they needed to adhere to their shareholders, as well as to consider the needs and considerations for stakeholders, those in the community that they operate in. It goes beyond just making money for this group. I need to consider everybody that comes into contact with my business. So the more companies started to do that, and the more society started to shift, administration changes, social injustices, gender inequality debates over the years kind of rolled into what we see it now. In the pandemic, for instance, pushing beyond that, the global pandemic has really turned, I forget who said this, but they call it the use of ESG factors a bull market luxury and a bear market necessity. And it's really important because it helps to factor out companies that are just going to cause problems. we want to think about it that way. If they're really not considering the wants and needs of their stakeholders and shareholders, they're just going to run into a lot of issues long term. So making sure that they can withstand something like a global pandemic and be able to adjust their business practices accordingly. So honestly, that's really how it kind of flowed down the mountain, but it's still rolling. Currently, 1 in every $3 under professional management in the US uses some kind of sustainable investment screen. So something to hang your hat on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty significant. I would say that snowball's picked up. I mean, it's going in the direction of majority, right? If it's up to 1/3 already. And what kinds of things we're looking at environmental, social, and governance, right? So what do those factors look like? Are we looking at I'll let you answer that so that I was going to go into as an example and I'm like, no, she'll do much better.
Oh, sure. No problem. So they're pretty straightforward. The environmental factor is obviously going to be anything that impacts our physical world, the world we live in. Issues specifically related to climate change have been really the biggest ones. Things affecting the forest, water usage, resource usage, the health of communities based on the air they breathe and the water they drink, the trees and how they're being used.
And I would say carbon
or not.
footprint probably goes into
yes,
that. Yeah.
Yes, very much so. Anything affecting the physical world can really fall under that environmental umbrella. Social, on the other hand, kind of is a little more of a catch-all. And the reason I say that is because it's specific issues that are related to human beings. Anything under the human rights umbrella, human trafficking, slavery issues, gender equality, racial inequalities, trying to address all the factors that could conceivably impact people, whether or not they work for the company or generally if they're stakeholders in the community. That's one factor too. And then governance really has been used for a long time. It's fixating on the way companies are run. So their board of directors, do they have an independent board? Who's their board chair? Are they independent? How are they compensated? Do they have a good proportion of minorities and women represented? So those are just examples of factors that they're looking at here.
What's bubbling up for me is it seems like this would be good information to know, period. Like, it's kind of interesting that it's now becoming important, but why wasn't it before? I don't know. I mean, that's sort of what's popping into my mind.
Well, you're not the first one to ask that, so don't worry. It's funny. Many people think that it has to be some sort of politicized issue when it really isn't. If we really care about the long-term viability of corporations, we need to think about that. Unfortunately, in economics, we think of everything as being linear. We start here, we end up here, and we have to go through this line, and it has to keep going up forever. But there are boundaries, right? We're on a finite rock spinning around the sun. We can't use up everything. We can't, populate the planet till it explodes.
Right. There's
a cap to something. There's a threshold. And recognizing where those boundaries are, we can develop businesses to operate effectively within that structure. So rather than looking at economic activity like an airplane taking off, we can look at it like the growth of a tree. It starts off really small, it keeps going, and then it gets huge, but then it stops getting super huge, and then it just stays big, and then it lasts for hundreds of years potentially. So that's the way we need to think more about economics and businesses in general, because the ones that really care about that are the ones that are going to survive long term.
This has been absolutely fascinating. There is a wonderful testimonial in here maybe not wonderful. Okay, so we'll probably hide that later. But commentary, we'll check that out in a little bit.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being here. For those that would have more questions for Jenny, I would encourage you to check her out on Twitter, ask those questions, and we'll probably have her back to delve into this topic a little bit more. Thanks for being
Happy to
here.
help. Thanks, Nettie.